Well, let's save all this. I think this is dope. Let's save all this. Yeah.
That's
I know good conversation when I hear it. Today I'm sitting here with JJ. Welcome.
Thank you.
Pleasure to meet you. I've been a big fan of yours. I've been following you for a little bit over a year and was just really intrigued with your approach. Now I found out your age, how young you are, and just how important these conversations are to you. So tell me how someone your age, 20, young black male, got into speaking around policy, politics, and why it's important to you.
Well, first I want to begin by welcoming you to Chicago. Great place.
Thank you. Appreciate
Best city
that.
in the world. But I think that what got me started was I'd kind of always been politically adjacent throughout my childhood, but I never really dove into it until around 2020. 2016 really started to like get me to pay attention, but I took that time between then and 2020 to learn. And then around George Floyd was when I got galvanized to talk about things like police brutality. I remember doing like an Instagram live with the current student body president at my high school because I was the vice president. And I just got to talking about certain things, how I felt about the whole situation. And it kind of snowballed into me wanting to make content about it, me wanting to talk about different things. I didn't expect to get it, at least at this point, this quickly. But along the way, I made sure that I was able to do my research, do my due diligence into things that I want to talk about. And throughout it, it's been a very cool experience to see the effect of things that go on and to be somebody so young in the space. Because when I meet other people who do what I do, it's kind of like there's definitely a generational gap because it's not something that a lot of people my age are interested in. But it's like when certain things happen, like instances of police brutality, it kind of just forces your hand where you're like, I can't sit back and say nothing. So it's like there's not really a age for that as long as you're able to articulate and do what you have to do to actually learn about what you want to talk about.
I think the important thing, and we talked a little bit off camera about this, is how someone of me being 44 years old, you being 20, different backgrounds, different paths, but we're here and believe a lot of the same things. But I think our way of getting here and our way of getting through my audience and your car audience are completely different. So how do we bridge that gap between a generation of mine who I feel like talk down to you guys, feel like, hey, this is how we did it, so this is how you have to do it. But I know through coaching my kids, that shit doesn't work. You guys don't like to be told what to do, when to do. You guys kind of want to figure it out with a little bit of guidance. So I think our goal here is, how do we bridge that gap and how do we bring the older people together with the younger people, understanding again that we have the same common goal, which is informing people, educating people, and then allowing them to make their decisions based off that.
Yeah, I think part of it is the guidance, but it's also like both sides need to be able to work because it's like the older generation does have a tendency to like talk down to us and belittle the things that we do, but we also have the tendency to make blanket statements about the older generation now, like y'all don't know nothing, y'all done ruined everything for us. It's like some of that can be true on either side, but in order to have a dialogue, you need to have the ability to be like, okay, I see why you believe, or at least I understand. I might disagree with it, but if I can't show you and repeat to you how you came about that conclusion, or at least get to ask you about it, then I can't really attack it or talk to you about it or build a different view in an effective way if I don't even understand where you got the belief from. So I think that's one of the bigger things that I like try to focus on is I always make sure I want to show you where I get my information. I don't just like put up screenshots just as like a little aha. I want you to read it and I want people to read it in order to understand that's like, okay, even if I miss something, this is exactly what I read, this is where I got it from, and I want to make sure that at least you're doing some sort of the same thing. So I think that when you start from that point, you can build that generational thing because we have to take ourselves out of the stigmas that we hold for each generation. There are a lot of stereotypes all over the place. So I think the moment we get out of that and we're like in the same room like we are now, and we get to like pick each other's brain about what was custom at the time. How did I get this information? Where do you guys get your information? You can have a much more cohesive conversation because if two people are talking about completely different like backgrounds for where they got stuff, it's just kind of like a screaming match. And that's where you see a lot of times where nuance is so like slept on. I kind of wanted to figure out from your perspective, like, where do you see guiding the younger generation? Like, where's your role in that? And how do you think that that moves forward, like in a way that people can work together?
I think it obviously starts with respectful conversation. And I think it's more of a guidance instead of a forcing. You know what I mean? I feel like we need to guide because we've been through so much life and seen so much life, but you guys are also in the moment living that life in a newer version. So again, I think it's respectful conversations. We can agree to disagree, or we can disagree without disrespecting. And again, I think that's some of the stuff you just touched on. But I think the bigger thing for me is because I'm always thinking big. How do we? And I'm going to put this on you and whoever's watching out there, and our fans over here, and our team here. How do we build an ecosystem with older opinionated creators or people with platforms and younger opinionated content creators with platforms, again, because we're all on the same page. We just may have different ways of getting there. So definitely want to pick your brain once we're done with this on how do we build something that we can bounce ideas off of and have an ecosystem where again we can agree to disagree, disagree, but it's respectful, and at the end of the day we're getting educational information out there for people to have an educated and formal decision making when it comes to, we got a big election coming up.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I like to focus on is authenticity because I'm not a big fan of getting paid to specifically tailor what I say in a particular way or to have an opinion about something. I think one of the big benefits of social media recently is that while there's a lot of drawbacks, obviously, the people who you see talking and giving messages, a lot of the times before they reach a certain point, are like that same person. They're an authentic person that's like usually a one-man team, one-person team, and they come about their opinions in the way that they choose to. So I think that having a focus on authenticity and being able to see where that stuff comes from, it already gets you in the door because it's like it's harder to have a conversation that's grounded and able to reach a conclusion if the conversation is being derailed by outside stuff, whether it's you're funded to say a particular thing or where you're deliberately spreading misinformation and everything. It's hard for me to respect that perspective if it is deliberately coming from somewhere that's like bad. So as long as we're able to like respect each other's authenticity and be like, okay, I see you as a person, not just like a content mill or not just like as a different voice for something. I see you as a person. I can see where your biases might come into play. I can see where you did the work. Then you are able to like further dissect what that person is saying and also understand it because listening is a big part of it as well. It's one thing for you to like say a bunch of talking points at me that might sound good to people who are listening for it. It's another thing for you to sit down and be like, no, this is what I mean by that. And I think always one of the most powerful things you can ask somebody is like, what do you mean? Like expand. Because you would be surprised at how many people don't want to.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. I mean, let's get into it. I mean, you create content that gives context, different headlines and information we see in the news. What are some of the agreements you think need to be understood? I mean, we've touched on this a bit, but to hold productive discussion.
I think one of the core agreements that you need to have before you do anything is whether or not the conversation's based in reality. So obviously, obviously we're all like, we have our conversations with each other, but it's like, if you're scrolling through and you see a social media platform and they post a headline about something, you can immediately tell what the discourse on that topic is by going to the comment section before you even fully read what they were actually talking about. An example of this that I think of, there was a policy proposal that came out in New York about helping migrants. And it was basically like essentially a debit card that was handed out. That was like about $13 for the day. You get to like buy food and everything so you don't like starve. And people reposted it through like various social media platforms with just the headline. And they were like, oh, they're giving people like credit cards and letting people run up a tab and they're not even taking care of us. It's like you are now focusing all your animus on a group that's already disadvantaged based off of nothing but a headline when those people did that to get the click. They didn't do that to like further inform you about what the policy was. So once you go and you read the policy and you realize, oh, it's kind of like very similar to EBT and various social welfare programs that we already have, it takes all the rage out of it and you get to actually see, oh, is this a benefit or is this a drawback? So it's like reading beyond that headline and realizing that there are certain people who do just want to get your engagement, but always questioning and being like, is that the full story or is someone just trying to bait me?
Well, I feel like too, we live in a world now because again, we touched on this before. Like we get our main source of news from social media now, and I really think that I know for older people too. I mean, some people will take the time to engage and read the actual article, but I've been guilty at times of reading just the headlines and being like, "Oh shit, are you serious?" Without actually again reading the context and the reasoning behind it. How do we get out of that mold, because I think a lot of there's so many different things to look for, and there's we only have so much time in a day.
Mhm.
How do we get out of that mode of just being headline readers and actually engaging in the actual process which the headlines speak to?
Mm. I think one of the big things you can do is acknowledge whether or not it speaks to your biases. Because a lot of the times when I'll read like a headline, like I'll be on a phone call with like some of my friends and I'll see a headline and I'll be like, oh, they doing this. And like, really? And then we just move on. So it's like
Right.
if and it's probably because it has something to do with something I already believed already. So even if I think recognizing that it's like if I read something and it made me just like feel good or like or it was funny based off reading the headline, it's like sometimes you can take that time to be like, okay, but what's really going on? Because you have to acknowledge that it's not just like a one-sided thing.
Right.
There's baits, there's trickery, there's stuff because a lot of people want to make money. So it's all over the place where you have to see things and be like, okay, let me question for at least a second. Maybe you don't have to do it on every single thing you read, but at least when you can have a grasp on, okay, that sounded like something that I already agree with. Let me go read about it. At the very minimum, you could come out and be like, oh, it was something I agree with, but you'll have more understanding about
More
it and you'll at least
context.
be able to talk to somebody about
Right.
it. So that when someone brings up just the headline that they read to you, you can be like, oh, yeah, that was actually about blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that overall informs people a lot more than just like the laugh and then move on.
Right. What type of discussions do you want to see from people who have different opinions?
Ooh. I kind of I want to throw this at you first because I feel like I have some thoughts about it, but I also feel like the conversations of differing opinions, especially when it comes like to a generational standpoint, it usually does not go the most positive way because again, there's a lot of biases and a lot of stereotypes that we hold based on like generational lines. So I want to ask you like what discussions have you seen? Like, what do they typically sound like, and what do you think like should happen? Like, what do you want to see?
Obviously, I have a sports background, and sports media is a space now where I feel is crazy because it used to be journalism, reporting, and you're talking about it. I'm talking about sports right now, the athlete and their craft, and I think now it's gone to who's loudest, who's the first, and who could be the most disrespectful. And I can take all those three things I just named and put them in any category: politics, sports, entertainment, anything like that. So I think first and foremost is just, you can disagree without disrespecting. I think that a lot of us, as we get older, we get set in our ways, and to be able to keep an open mind. And I think I have a whole four of them, but I have kids. I have 15-year-old twins who are young teenagers who have a whole different outlook. And then I also have a 5-year-old and everything in between. So I thank God for that, because if I was a 44-year-old man going through the racism and the police bullshit and sports career, and I didn't have anybody to kind of leverage back of what's coming next, I would probably be like most of these older guys who are set in their ways, and I've went through this and this scorned me, so I'm going to be. So I give a lot of credit to, I think, my open mind is because I have children and I coach children. I understand early on that I couldn't be the 6'8" former NBA player who, this is how you do it, and this is, because that it doesn't work. I had to get down on a knee, talk to them eye to eye, get them to gain my trust, and then bring them where I wanted to take them. So I think, to answer your question, I just think it's open-mindedness, and it's okay to disagree. But I think if you do disagree, you don't have to disrespect. And I think, I don't think we've ever been more divided as a country right now. Politics used to be, I just don't agree with him, but now it's just like, now, okay, well, I hate him.
Yeah.
Or if you like him, you can't like this person. Or if you like this policy, you must hate this policy. And we live in such a either or, instead of several things can be true and several things can be untrue.
Yeah, and I think that nuance is one of those things that's so lost on online Discord, specifically because a lot of people want to like profit off the engagement. That gets to the being the loudest, being the first. It's so you see it so much, even people in my creator space where it's like you just want to be the first one to read the headline of a policy or to give like a brief overview. And it's like, this is why you're already correct for believing what you did in the first place. And it's like, you don't contribute to anything when you do that, when you don't acknowledge that like multiple things can be true at the same time. There's a lot of different conversations. Like I know a big topic is like intersectionality. It's like you can't do justice to having an intersectional conversation if you don't acknowledge that there are ways in which one identity conflicts with another one, and there might be a benefit in one case, it might be a drawback in another case. It doesn't always have to be all one or all the other. I've ran into situations where I'll like make videos about a creator because they'll do like the same lies like over and over again. And it's not because I dislike that person. I don't have to hate that person. I don't have to hate you if you watch
Or I'm
them.
going to dispel your
I'm
BS.
exactly. I'm going to tell you exactly how they're lying to you. It's up to you to sit through my video and look at the ways in which I believe they came to a wrong conclusion. But if I came to a wrong conclusion, you can also tell me about that as well. It doesn't have to be a I hate you or you watch them, therefore you're not intelligent. Sometimes you just get caught up in things that confirm your biases. And it takes a lot of like self-discipline and a lot of learning to unlearn some of those things. And that's not like an easy thing to do. It's not something that someone should just wake up one day and decide to do. But taking that first step will automatically be able for you to see like a lot more nuance than what you thought there was. And I think that a lot of people get caught up in this like, well, I took that personally. Like you went after somebody that I enjoy watching, therefore I don't like you and you must not like him. It's like it doesn't have anything to do with that at times. Sometimes just like the broader impact, what the messaging is and how they can better themselves, how I can better myself.
Right.
And I think that once we detach the personality like attachment to it, it's so much easier to like sit back and analyze like, okay, I'm wrong about this, but I can be wrong, like, and let me do better to learn about it. Sometimes people just kind of go like, well, I'm wrong, but I don't care. Like, what do you mean you don't care? Then why? Like, why are you here then? It's one of those things.
Well, it's interesting because when I was your age, obviously, I'm dating myself, but there wasn't social media, you know, and since social media has been a vehicle for so many different things, but particularly policy and political views, misinformation has been a monster. And is that something like race? Like, as much as we want to think that everyone's always going to be kumbaya, it just may not be like that. Will misinformation always be a part of the game?
I think so, because I think that misinformation serves a very vital role to people who don't want to see the unity, people who don't want to see like the generations or the racial backgrounds come together. Because, like it or not, people who are normal people who just do everyday things are the vast majority of people. The people that you see online, even with me, are in the vast minority of like anything that you'll see on a day-to-day basis. So it kind of, because the status is attached to it, it kind of attaches and makes you think that like these people are so great. But at the end of the day, people power is where it comes from, because we would be nothing without the people who pay attention to us. So I feel like that misinformation is specifically the wedge that a lot of people use, to where it's like, if they're fighting each other, they can't look at me. And if they keep warring over the similar things that we both know we're putting out there on purpose in order to lie to them about, it's like, and it doesn't even need to be a conspiracy thing. It's just like people will put headlines out there that are deliberately misleading or not cover the full thing. Or even content creators will put something that has the full context in it, but only read the parts that suit what their audience want to hear. So it's like, you are able to divide people and drive wedges between people, where if we actually all took a step back and gauge the nuance, we could be like, okay, I see where this is wrong. I see where this is right. Cool. But cool, move on and let's work together is not a cool reaction.
Yeah, right.
It's a dangerous one to a lot of people. So I think that misinformation will always be there, but I think that social media gives us the power to spread it, and it also gives us the power to check it. And I think that that's where a lot of the roles that me and you and other people who are in our similar area, I think those are the roles that we need to occupy. And I want us to do a lot better at that, because I feel like that's, we can't let the narratives proliferate, because at the end of the day, it harms you too. You might think that you're benefiting right now because of the clicks and the engagement, but how are people viewing you and your demographic as a product, as a product of the things that you push out there?
Absolutely. When you create videos to share information, are you surprised by the comments and the engagement and the back and forth?
Am I surprised? Not really. Sometimes there have been certain things where it's like, especially people who I'll disagree with will have like a very visceral reaction to some of the things that I'll talk about. And it again, like I mentioned, it's not necessarily because I came at them in a way that was like super disrespectful, or like in a way that doesn't open the door for a conversation. A lot of times just because they deeply hold on to certain things, and it's very hard to accept that you're wrong about certain things. But I think that for the most part, I've been lucky enough to have a lot of love and a lot of support from the people who do watch my stuff and who comment, because it's like they can acknowledge that like, oh, some thought went into this. I feel like from your end, because you also have a sports background, like why, because I'll see certain things. There's certain like whenever politics intersects with the sports world, you see like it's almost like a immediate reaction where it's like, oh, this shouldn't be happening. Like, keep it out of sports. It's like politics affects literally
Life.
everything. So I want to know, like, as someone who's on social media in a sports background, like, what's your engagement like? Is it like, or when you try to talk about certain issues or when you try to do that, do you get like a similar narrative, like, oh, stick to XYZ or whatever? Is it?
I think when I started, I did. You
Mm.
know what I mean? Because again, as I told you, I was known as the bad boy. Few fights here and there, few slaps, few ejections, you know, day-to-day stuff. But again, as I also told you, my background is, you know, biracial, functioning drug addicts as parents, but they always put me in white schools to learn and went to college to learn and should have my degree, but I decided to go pro, but, you know, took things serious. So I was always interested in the old narrative, you know, don't judge a book by its cover. I think I was
Mm.
always judged because I'm tattooed. And again, I had a checkered background in the league. You know what I mean? So
Mm.
when I step outside of that sports box, like what's going on? But again, like you, how do I educate myself? And I don't
Mm.
jump into everything because I don't have time to jump into everything, and not
Mm.
everything interests me. You know what I
Mm.
mean? My whole thing, and the reason why I love doing this and teamed up with P68 more than anything was to continue to educate myself with the
Mm.
right information. You know, because I feel like, you know, at my age, a lot of the things I'm fighting for, I may not see
Mhm.
during my time here. But like I said, I have a tribe of children behind me and people who look up to me that are behind me that will probably, you know, reap the benefits of what we're fighting for. So, you know, it's really tricky with athletes. You see someone like Stephen A. Smith now, and he's
Mm.
jumping into the space and putting his foot in his mouth here and there, and people
Mm.
are killing him.
Talk
You know what
about
I
it.
mean? It's a dangerous spot to be in. I think particularly for an athlete because, you know, I don't remember who said it during the Trump election or during the Trump initial election, but shut up and dribble was
Yeah.
a big thing that they threw out there, and we're like, hold on.
Mhm.
But I think at the same time that challenged some athletes because some athletes, I'm not going to lie, are very let me read the title and let me give you my opinion based because I make a lot of money and this is where I'm at. But you're
Mm.
not talking to the masses there. You're talking
Mm.
to a very select few. So
Yeah.
I think the key is again, not to cut you off. I think the key is really just educating yourself on what's important to you, and then if you feel comfortable, because not a lot of athletes feel comfortable, and you shouldn't have to if you're an athlete. It's not a must. But if you feel comfortable, utilize your platform because as athletes, when we speak, people listen.
Mhm.
People like again, I like to reference my kids like I'm telling them the right shit, but if LeBron says it or Steph says the same thing I say, they're like, "Oh, okay." I'm like, "Well, I told you that 2 weeks ago, bro." You know what I mean? So it's just like understanding the power we have as, if you want to call it public face, whether athlete, entertainment, music, our
Mm.
voices travel. So I think it's very important for us to educate ourselves on what we speak on if it's outside of our profession.
And I think a way I can bridge that gap too is that that's not just something that happens with like athletes, like with other creators in my space. Even if you talk about, like with me, I talk about traditionally politics, stuff that happened within the Black community, and even though in my mind it lines up, I started talking about like the Kendrick Lamar Drake thing. And that is directly in the Black community. That's a
Right.
lot of political like ties into it. But even when I start talking about that, you get people who kind of do the shut up and dribble thing where they're like, oh, stick to politics.
Right.
Or like, if you play a game, well, stick to playing that game. Why did you have to get political? It's like you don't take a step to realize how much politics influences your entire life
Right.
to where like you should have at least like one interaction with something involving politics that you talk about every day because you have one every single day from the mattress you wake up on and the
Mhm.
regulations that go into that and making sure that it's made in a specific way. Literally everything you start your day with politics, but you just don't acknowledge it.
Right.
So it's like when someone brings it to your attention, your reaction shouldn't be, I don't want to see that. Your reaction should be, I want to see more of that so
How
I
can I
can
learn?
yeah, so I can equip myself with things that either it could just be a nice trivia thing to know, or it can actually galvanize you to like have action within the
Mhm.
world because regardless, you're going to have to interact with it at some point in your life.
Mhm.
So it's like I feel like both athletes and creators can relate on that point where it's like even if you may think you're just like a nobody because you just make videos or whatever, you'd be surprised how much weight your words
No
carry and
question.
how much dissonance happens when you're doing something outside of what they want you to do. It's like
Mhm.
you're a commodity where it's like you have to take a step back and look at them as people because then you're able to do things like see where they got their opinions from
Mhm.
and see how like fact checking doesn't necessarily mean that they're a horrible person or something
Mhm.
like that. I think it all starts with just seeing them as people and realizing that like people have multiple interests. So it's like it doesn't need to be a negative thing when I
Mm-mm.
talk about politics or when I choose not to and talk
Mm.
about something goofy.
Yeah.
It's like that's what life is.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, you know, trying to be put in boxes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think we are as an athlete or a former athlete, I mean, I touched everything, you know, from how much money they took out of my checks to running a family to business to, educating myself in this space. I just think there's so many different things. And, for athletes in particular, there used to be the dumb jock or the dumb athlete narrative, but I just think more than ever, and particularly this generation of athletes are just so much more in tune because, the world is at the palm of their hand. And if they choose to engage or choose to, inform themselves, everything is right there. So again, I never like to try to be put in boxes, but I also think as athletes in particular, if we do step outside of our box, because everyone tries to put us in the box, we really have to know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think also like for athletes, it's like, especially in sports that are predominantly like Black dominated, you have to acknowledge that like there are more things at play with people's biases that might make people more prone to want to put you in a box. It's like if you're doing one thing, it's like, oh, I like when you're doing that. I don't like when you're doing that. It's like you have to acknowledge that as someone with that platform, with that background, it's like people are going to react that way. And it's not necessarily like oh, well, they're just haters. It's indicative of a broader thing. And it's like if you have that engagement and those eyes on you, you can use it to like to change that narrative, whatever. Because I want athletes and people who done a lot of crazy and hardworking stuff in their life to be able to have that ability to talk about whatever it is they talk about, as long as they like know what they're talking about. It's like I don't think that people should be put in boxes in that way, and it comes back to certain biases that people have that affect every aspect of your identity, whether it's culture or race or ethnicity or anything. So that's one of those things.
Great. What is your biggest frustration with how information is being shared these days? Uh-oh. Deep breath.
Probably my biggest frustration is I feel like as a whole, I've touched on it a little bit, as a whole, we can do a lot better in seeing where we get our information from, but especially like I feel like there's two sides of it. There's one side where we don't acknowledge enough that certain areas or certain institutions are like deliberately trying to push a certain narrative that like gets people to fight against each other. But I think also we kind of fall too far into the conspiracy rabbit hole where it's like if somebody says something that's just a practical thing that we need, like there's policy differences regardless of like what side politically you're on between like things like students at school getting free lunch. And we saw that as like a flashpoint. If you look locally, like certain people didn't want it, certain people do want it. And it's like, I feel like when you work with the people necessary to get something as small as free lunch, you have two reactions. It's either the one side is like, yeah, we don't want that at all. What are we doing? Or it's the other one that's like, it's like, oh, but you're working with those people and those people aren't like what we need in the long run. It's like, that might be true, but you have to start somewhere in order to get some sort of change. You can't just like snap your fingers and everything becomes exactly the way you want it. There's work on the ground that needs to be done. And sometimes you have to interact with people that you disagree with. So I feel like when spreading that information, it's very frustrating when it's like, I need to work with someone, I need to connect with someone, I need to like have a perspective that can affect a lot of people. But some people will be upset by that because it's like, oh, you're not pure anymore in our eyes. We want you to do this one thing.
Or you're selling out.
Yeah, or you're selling out when at the end of the day, it's like, I believe the same things that you believe. But in order to get there, I just have a different vision of where I want to get there. And another thing that frustrates me is when people don't have that vision at all, when they're just kind of there to be a distraction and they get the status, they get the numbers in order to make it seem like they're legitimate and they're part of the conversation. But in reality, they're just frauds. They're just a roadblock. And that's what their entire thing is being.
Was anyway.
Yeah. And I feel like when it comes to like information out there, I think there is a generational divide. Like I see some of the things that my mom sees on her feed and I'm like, I don't even know how I don't even know where that stuff comes from. So I want to know like, where is it, especially with internet coming like more prominent in you guys' time? Like, was it as bad, not like as bad, but like, was it something that you guys had to cautiously look out for, like how people are telling you certain things or how information is being spread? Or is it just like now because internet's so prominent, it's like
everywhere? I think now because everyone is on the internet.
Yeah.
Before, I mean, growing up, I was born in 1980 and we didn't have conversations at the dinner table about politics or policy. And all through school and all through high school and all through college, it wasn't a conversation for minorities in general. You know what I mean? We were never meant to have a footing or a voice in this space. So we had to go outside of our comfort zone to educate ourselves in a space that no one wanted us in. But I think once we started doing that, I mean, you look at the last election, I mean, we came together so strong that they thought we cheated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is crazy.
Still think we
You know what I mean? So it's just like when we realize that we are the majority and not the minority, and we
Mm.
need to continue to educate ourselves and unify to change this world.
Mm.
It sounds good and it kind of sounds almost easy, but then
Mm.
you know how many roadblocks and hurdles we hit,
There's
you
so
know,
many
along those
things.
ways.
And it's like it's not always the reason why it's so difficult is because it's more nuanced. It's not always that like the bad people are telling the other bad people the bad thing. It's like your mom, your father, like your brother will come to you and be like, "Oh, did you see this thing?" And then they have already beliefs that they formed about it that's so disconnected from what you believe,
Actually
where it's
going
like,
on.
"Oh, now we got to have that conversation at Thanksgiving again." Like it's
Mhm.
one of those things where it's like even people who you know in every other aspect of their life might hold on to something that you vehemently disagree with. And it's like you need to use that ability to like connect with that person still in order to maybe you change their mind, maybe you don't. But as if you already seen them as a person, you should be able to utilize that and be like, okay, I understand. But let's talk about this and
Mhm.
let's talk about XYZ. And it's like sometimes it's easy to paint the
Yeah.
people who you disagree with as bad people
Broad stroke.
because it makes it easier to
Mhm.
be angry to be
Let me move
but
on.
yeah but
Forget them.
it's almost harder work but more fulfilling work to realize that it's like no you probably just have been through a lot of stuff that I haven't been through so I
Mhm.
want to understand that and then I can understand like either I got something wrong or you did and I feel like it's frustrating because we don't do that it's
No.
more it's nuances like you sold out or like oh he there's this thing on TikTok where it's like oh he never misses for like the last 4 years every time I make a video I have like at least 10 comments of like, oh, he hasn't missed yet. He just hasn't missed. So it's like, what? When I say something that's like, yeah, that's still wrong, but like they got it because of this. It's like, oh, I don't know about this one, bro. I've had that a couple of times and I'm like, nothing's changed. I still do exactly what I've done. So it's just like when I disagree with you, it's that I miss. And it's like, you need to unpack that because it's like, I will always disagree with you in some regard. I'm not you. So, but at least I will show you.
Yeah.
So I think that's it's frustrating, but it's part of the
I
game, I
think my
guess.
favorite thing about you, and obviously meeting for the first time, but just kind of being a fan from afar, is when you do have rebuttals towards people, it's so calm, it's so cool, it's so collected, and there's so much real information. I'm like, I'd be like, man, fuck him. I am not gonna say that, bro. You hit everything on the point. Let me go. Oh, that was right. This is where he got this from. He got me. You know what I mean? Like it's funny. Like people sometimes just want to engage and be, you know, roadblocks, and they want ignorance to kind of lead that. But when you hit them with the cool, calm face and just composed and everything, they're just like, all right, I give up. So I think that's funny.
You'd be surprised how quick people resort to like personals and
Right? They got attacked.
there's numerous times where I've made videos and I'll like watch the response that they make and it's not like you would have thought
Because
that
they
you
can't
watched
fight the facts. So
exactly
let me
and it's
attack
like
your character.
and it's like I don't see a point in doing that because it's like it's much more productive to be like
Right.
okay I was wrong about this or okay at least I see where he got that from maybe I still disagree but you know I see where he got it from, and and there's been a couple times where people have done that, and it's like really commendable. Like even people in my fan base will go over to their comment section and be like, "We appreciate you for this," because at least it's like you recognize you might have got something wrong, you can admit it. But a lot of people get caught up in the ego of it all, and they're like, "Nah, let me just say something, even though he didn't say this. I'm gonna say he said this." It's like, wait a minute, hold on. I think you're just being a roadblock at that point. And you'd be surprised how many people are like that. You just got to watch out for if they're just genuinely like that, if they're stuck in their ways, or if they're being funded to do that. It's all types of things that are now at our fingertips, which is I think is a benefit.
You have, you know, north of 1 million followers on TikTok. Do you think 5 to 10 minute videos are enough to share information, or you think that's just kind of the starting point?
It's absolutely not. I'm a weird person in that I like watching like I'll go on YouTube and watch like a 40-minute to an hour video about like a specific niche topic, like whether it's history or policy wise and everything, because I just find it interesting. But I think our attention spans are very much affected by social media.
Yes.
So I'll make a 5-minute video and people will tell me I'm pushing it. Like it used to be like I don't know what to do. I used to make like 60-second videos where I'd speed my videos up by like 5-10% just to like fit everything in it. And I still have to like make a part two because there's so many ways. Because when I realized when I got into this space is that when you're trying to analyze like factual information and provide real information to people, it's so much harder than going out and saying 6 lies that you rehearsed and heard from other people. And it sounds really good because you're saying it really confident, but it takes infinitely longer. For each lie, I have to spend 1 to 2 minutes explaining why it's wrong. I don't want to just be like, nah, he's wrong. I got to show you.
The reason why.
So that's why it'll push me 5, 6, 7 minutes. but not everybody wants to see that. So it's a constant struggle of how do I make this punchy and understandable, but how do I shorten the time when the real conversation should be, you guys should be wanting to see the longer
In
time.
depth.
You should be wanting to understand, like, it's not just some kid saying, oh, he's wrong. It should be like, oh, this is the specific reasons why. This is probably where they got that information. This is why I'm coming at it in the way that I'm coming at it, but I don't have time to say that. So I feel like that also contributes to the nuance being lost. Because like if I could tell you 5 minutes worth of content, but I have to shrink it down to 1 minute, I'm gonna leave out some stuff that I would have put in that might give you a understanding of my world. And it's like, I feel like that's one of those things. Like even I know with podcasting, like a big thing is clipping certain things to make it punchy or whatever, put it on, and that usually drives engagement for the listeners. Do you guys see that as like a not like a disadvantage? Because it's like you still want people to see what you're talking about. And sometimes an hour, 2 hours is very long. But does it say something about like our ability to stick it out and fight for the things we want to fight for? If
It does, especially when it comes to what we do. You know, we're hoping that those 60-second clips is going to make you want to go watch the whole show, or your 3-minute speech is going to make me want to go deep dive the reference you pulled it from. That's only our hopes. You know, we're putting a lot of hope or expectation on strangers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it just depends, and I agree. Our attention spans are shorter than ever because there's just so much out there. You know what I mean? Like I feel like if I give 40 minutes to this deep dive of this history thing, I'm gonna miss out on something. You know what I mean? So you always feel like I'm gonna miss something if you really deep dive into something. So again, I think obviously that's individually based, but my hope is always that this cool ass clip that I just showed you of me and Shaq's conversation about Kobe is gonna make you really want to go sit back and watch the whole conversation. But sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it turns into like a selling point where it's like you always got to sell people like,
look how cool this was, or look how much great information is. Will you please go back and without having to say, will you please go back and watch the rest? I'm hoping that I leave you with enough cool information or exciting information that you want to go back and look at it.
And it's like it's one of those things where I've had to struggle with it, obviously, because I've grown up like on social media. So it's like I go through things where I have to like compartmentalize, where it's like I go through weeks where I'll just watch history and politics, whatever. Then it's like I know I have a lot of like funny stuff to catch up on. So like for the next few days, I'll just watch, binge watch like funny stuff. And it's like I feel like probably that's not the best thing. I wish it could be more of like an intake process for everything. But it's like it's a weird situation where I'm in where it's like I could have like I would want to obviously have a podcast where I do like longer form stuff, whatever. But it's like with the videos that I do, it's like it's not that I want to be set in my ways and not want to change, because it's not like the younger generation doesn't have work to do as well. But it's like it's always long. So like I really want to just tell you everything that I have to tell you. Sometimes I have to recognize like that's not where people are sometimes. And I think that just in general, recognizing that sometimes it's not where people are would go a long way in any discourse, not even just on social media. So it's like it allows you to think of different ways to say.
Well, it's also too, I mean, that's on you to understand what your audience wants.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what makes you successful, is you've kind of hit that sweet spot. Sometimes people say you're pushing it, but for the most part, they're engaged on what you have to say. And that's how you continue to feed and grow your audience.
Yeah, and I think that comes with a lot of work as well, because it's like you need to gain the trust of people, and I think the biggest way to do that is just the transparency. Always being open about what your intentions were with something, even if you have to make like a little explainer video on why I did X, Y, Z. It always helps to give people insight into your mind and how it works, because a lot of people make assumptions about it. If the more assumptions you make, the further from reality you stay. So it's like,
All right. Well, last question before we get you out of here in this kind of a two-part. How do you see yourself in society, and how does that translate to how you see participation in policy and law?
Yeah, it's crazy. This it's a heavy question, because I feel like so much of the way I approach things is definitely influenced by my identity, in the sense that it's not that I choose to believe and choose not to believe certain things because I'm a Black man, but it's like I feel like there's certain ways in which I have to move to get the progress that I want to see for people that are just like me as a Black person. And it's like I don't think that it's focused on enough, because I feel like a lot of times people try to focus on a conversation where it's like, oh, you're reading in too much into XYZ just because I haven't taken the time to unpack and see if that is actually something that's applicable. So it's like the way my identity like influences and like informs how I interact with society and laws, it's just kind of like I know that there's a lot of people who, and you even mentioned it, like not getting to see everything in your lifetime. I believe that there's a lot of stuff. I know that there's a lot of stuff that I'm fighting for right now that I won't even get to see in my lifetime. But it's like I know that that is a necessary fight, because if it doesn't happen,
Right.
then we're gonna be in the same cycles repeating. And it's like I think that the best way to move forward is to always have that question on you every single time whenever you see something. It's like, from my perspective, what does this do to me? What does this do to people like me? What effect does this have on how they view me and everything? And it doesn't need to be like a personal thing. It can be just as a member of a broader demographic. And it's like always doing your best to see within that, because even as you get more successful, sometimes people fall into that trap where it's like, nah, I'm just me. Like there's a lot of celebrities that I've seen recently that it's like whenever a conversation with race will pop up, someone will clip some celebrity that does not talk about politics, talking about how, you know what, race doesn't really matter anymore. It's that was old. I'm me. It's like, well, you have the money and the luxury to say
To
that,
be you, right?
and you have the money and the luxury to also unlearn that. So it's like I think that always having that intensity and wanting to be like, yeah, maybe what I'm seeing is not exactly what's going on. How can I inform myself? That's something that you need to have, especially as a Black man in the United States, because you can't ever accept something at face value, and you don't need to like build a conspiracy about it, but you do need to grab onto the piece of information that are there and see where that takes you, because then you can then sympathize with people who are from different backgrounds than you and how they're also treated by the same society and the same laws, also to build that unity. I think that it's a very unique perspective. Do you think that that's something that has been like affected, or do you see it affect people like the higher you move, like in class, like the less ability to like see and take in, like, oh, that actually does still affect me?
Yeah, I definitely think people get blinded by money or status as they continue to excel in whatever journey as God has put them on, because I think a lot of people, I think it's also you forget where you came from.
Mm,
You know, I came from drugs, abuse, violence, food stamps, moving, family living with each other. I was able to make a great career and continue to make a solid career, but I've never forgot what that was like. And
mhm,
that's again one of the reasons why I use my platform for all those people who don't have a voice and
mhm,
don't have a platform. Because although I have made it, and although I'm not crazy, crazy, filthy rich, I'm very comfortable.
mhm,
So although I'm comfortable, how do I still speak for the people that I know, family members or people I grew up with who came from where I came from, that don't
mhm,
have these opportunities or views? So I
mhm,
definitely think, I mean, to me, it always comes back to an open mind. And I
mhm.
think you've touched on that a lot, just the nuances, which is very important. But
Yeah.
for rat,
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things where it I feel like at times, especially with our demographic and with other minority groups as well, when you move up in status sometimes and you begin to forget like certain things, it's like that's the exact same perspective a lot of people, a lot of white people, or a lot of people in the majority already had, because they're born into a situation where they don't ever have
hmm
to interact with it
struggle.
in the first place. So it's
Hmm.
like in order to better understand that and better connect with those people, you have to keep a monitor on yourself as well.
Yeah.
Like I've come from a time where I grew up with a single mother, and wondering like she would always talk to me about financial problems and be like, oh, we can't get this because I need to afford bills, da da da. And it's like even my experience wasn't the most like poor and
Hmm.
poverty, and even nowhere near the worst
Hmm.
area I could have came from. So it's like me acknowledging that allows me to both recognize that, the people who think that these issues aren't real are probably people who had a way better upbringing than me, and people who think that I'm out of touch probably had a completely different experience than me. So it's like if you're able to check that bias in yourself, you're able to communicate with both people who can't relate in some ways and who also think they can't relate because they're in a different scenario. You get to move up and down and get to connect those people.
Hmm.
So it's like I think the more that you keep that grounding on you, the better that it will be, because you don't ever lose sight of your goal. And I think that a lot of times people get caught up in that. And it's my number one problem with people who will like say things out of a monetary thing. It's like I don't know whether or not you believe what you're saying,
Right.
or you're just saying things for the engagement and for the
Mhm.
money. And it's like at that point, how do you contribute to the
Right.
conversation? I don't think you can. So
Environment.
yeah,
Well, JJ, man, I appreciate you. It's been a pleasure meeting you in person.
100%.
Definitely looking forward to continuing to try to bridge this gap and learn and build and bring our worlds together. Tell the people where they can find you at.
You guys can find me at JWilliamJ on TikTok, JWilliamJ8 on Instagram, and everywhere else. My link It will be in my bio. You can find all my other socials. It was definitely a pleasure. It's insane getting this opportunity. And I definitely want to talk to more people, kind of get, especially within the older generation, but in like different arenas to get you guys' perspective. And because I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it can't get done with one generation. I know I hear a lot that it's like, oh, you're the generation that's gonna fix everything. And it's like, well, reality where every generation thinks they gonna be the generation that fix everything. But it's like the more we're able to work together across all types of backgrounds, then you actually get stuff done instead of like shirking it off to one set. So I love opportunities like this, and I definitely look forward to them in the future.
Forward to it, man. Well, that's our first edition of Softening the Ground. Make sure you guys stay tuned for more like it. We got some people in the house today, and we would love to have their feedback. So we are going to see what they have to say. So after hearing us, our back and forth, anything that stood out, anything that interests you guys, anything you thought we should hit that we didn't?
I like the way that both generations can actually come together and actually talk about like the way to bridge the gap between the two. Because there's a lot of people that I know personally that don't really care, and they need to start caring now.
Yeah, I think like realistically, I think that's what we need to be focusing on is the fact that like we have one generation here that's like not really into it, then we have another generation that's also not into it, but they've lived more, so they've been around it a lot more. I think merging that and like the fact that y'all can have this conversation and merge that is just like that's really what it needs to be about. Also, like touching on the misinformation, that's like huge with social media right now, especially in our generation. Like the whole like just push content and get these clicks and everything like that. That entire like influence comes from our generation, and I think being able to just come together as like a people instead of dividing it into okay, I'm this age or this age, being able to come together as a people and just like kind of expel that misinformation, but also like just engage and teach and stuff like that. I think that's really what needs to happen more often. So yeah, I loved it for real.
I think this conversation definitely needs to happen more because people need to see, hey, we can still work together. We can still be involved in our communities. We can still pull together. Even though we have different ways of doing it, we have a common goal and unity. So yeah, I think it was great.